Being generous with everyone is not the same as being virtuous. You were raised to believe that always showing up, answering every call, meeting every need, was the true measure of a good person. And so you showed up again and again for people who only seemed to remember your name when something was required of you. Stoicism does not call this loyalty. It calls it the absence of discernment. And that single distinction is what this reflection is for. There is an idea about goodness that most people in this country absorb before they are old enough to question it. It is not taught in any single place, yet it arrives clearly and consistently. The mark of a person of genuine character is their willingness to be there for others, to show up, to answer, to make themselves available without calculation, without hesitation, without keeping score. This idea feels noble because it is, in part, true. Generosity is a virtue. Reliability is a virtue. The capacity to set aside your own comfort for the sake of someone who is struggling, that is something to be honored. The myth is not that generosity matters. The myth is in what we quietly attach to it. We were taught in ways both spoken and unspoken that withholding availability is a form of selfishness, that the good person never asks whether this particular request from this particular person at this particular moment deserves their energy. The good person simply gives. They are the one in the group chat who always responds. They are the one whose phone is never off. They are the one who, when someone needs a reference or a favor or a listening ear at 11 at night, can be counted on without question. And they take a quiet pride in this, not a boastful pride. The genuinely good person would never boast, but a deep structural pride, an identity built on the foundation of being needed. This is where the myth begins to do its most serious work, because it does not feel like a myth from the inside.
It feels like integrity. The person who has lived by this principle has often done so for years, sometimes for decades, without examining what it has cost them. They have been the dependable one in their family, in their friendships, in their professional circles. They have rearranged their schedules, absorbed other people's urgencies, and extended themselves in ways that were never truly reciprocated. Not because they were naive, but because the story they were living placed moral weight on the giving and placed suspicion on the withholding. To say no felt like a failure of character. To notice the imbalance felt like ingratitude. To want something in return felt dangerously close to keeping score. And keeping score, they had been taught, was what small people did. Marcus Aurelius observed that a person must examine the judgments they have accepted without scrutiny, because those unexamined judgments govern behavior long after the circumstances that created them have passed. The judgment that unlimited availability equals goodness is one such belief. It arrives packaged in the language of virtue, and so it passes through the mind without resistance. What it produces over time is a particular kind of exhaustion that is difficult to name. Not burnout in the dramatic sense, not a collapse, something quieter and more insidious. A growing awareness that you are present in many people's lives in a very specific way, as a resource, as the person who handles things, as the reliable one, and that outside of that function, the contact is sparse. The check-ins that are not attached to a need, the conversations that exist simply because someone wanted to know how you were doing, these become rare. And yet the myth persists, because to acknowledge what it is producing would require questioning the very identity that has organized your sense of worth. The good person, as this culture defines them, does not ask to be considered. They do not track the imbalance.
They do not notice that the same people who need them urgently have been silent for months when nothing was required.
They continue to show up because showing up is who they are. But identity built entirely on availability is not character. It is a role. And the moment you begin to sense the difference between those two things, between who you genuinely are and the function you have been performing, something shifts. The exhaustion starts to have a shape. The silence between requests starts to feel less like comfortable distance and more like information. But what if the story you tell about your generosity is also the story of how you learned to disappear into other people's needs? Think about the contact that arrives after a long silence. It does not begin with an acknowledgement of the gap. It begins with the need. There is a request embedded in the first few sentences, sometimes stated directly, sometimes wrapped in warmth that dissipates the moment the favor is granted. The silence that follows is not awkward. It is simply the natural end of a transaction that was never named as one. There is a particular shape to this pattern, and once you begin to see it clearly, you cannot unsee it. The group chat that goes quiet for months until someone needs a recommendation, a connection, a place to stay. The person who resurfaces every time they are between jobs, between relationships, between moments of stability, and who disappears again once the urgency has passed. The acquaintance who engages warmly with your presence only when they want something adjacent to it. These are not dramatic betrayals. They are quiet, consistent signals, arriving so regularly that they begin to feel normal. What makes this pattern difficult to name is that it often arrives wearing the language of relationship. There are expressions of affection. There are promises to catch up that never materialize into actual plans.
There is warmth in the moment of need, genuine seeming warmth, that recedes when the need is met. The contact is not cold. It is simply calibrated. It arrives when it is useful and retreats when it is not. Utility is not connection. The ordinary texture of a relationship, the check-in with nothing attached to it, the message sent simply because something reminded someone of you, the presence during the unremarkable stretches of life. This is largely absent. You are there for the hard moments, the urgent moments, the moments that require something from you. But the easy moments, the ones that require nothing except genuine interest in your existence, pass without contact. And over time, a pattern emerges that is not defined by what is said, but by when the silence ends. Stoicism teaches that what repeats is not accidental. A single instance proves little. A consistent pattern, observed without the distortion of hope or the softening of loyalty, reveals the actual structure of a relationship, not the version you wish it to be, but the version that exists in practice, in behavior, in the timing of contact, and the texture of absence. What is consistent is not loyalty. What is consistent is utility. This is not a judgment of the people who operate this way. It is simply a description of a pattern that is more common than it is named. Many people move through their social world treating certain relationships as resources without ever examining that habit with any clarity. They reach for specific people at specific moments because those people have proven reliable in those moments, and they do not think further than that. The relationship is functional. It is not false in any deliberate sense. It is simply not what you've been calling it. Convenience masquerades as connection. And for a long time, you called it friendship. When you look at someone's behavior, what you see is often more truthful than the words they speak. Actions consistently reveal the essence of a person in ways that mere promises and intentions cannot. This observation resonates deeply with Stoic thought. What is consistent is not loyalty. What is consistent is utility. Marcus Aurelius observed that people may speak kind words,
but those words are nothing more than fleeting noises unless backed by action. The Stoics didn't focus on what people said, they focused on what they did. Their behavior reveals their true nature, and that's where we must place our attention. As Seneca taught, the most important thing in life is not what happens to you, but how you respond to what happens. A person may claim to be a good friend, but if their actions consistently serve only their needs, their words are mere convenience, not authenticity. Often, people like to believe that their loyalty is in how available they are for others. However, availability without discernment isn't loyalty, it's compliance. When you're constantly available to others, you're often not honoring yourself. You're simply fitting yourself into their narrative. You aren't showing up because you want to, but because your presence has become a utility, something needed, not desired. This is where the Stoics provide clarity. Epictetus wrote, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." When you observe someone's repeated actions, you begin to see the pattern that underlies their behavior. What we often miss is that people's presence is often driven by need, not affection. Their actions reveal the truth. They are available not because they care about you, but because they need something from you. Here lies the true struggle. Loyalty versus convenience. Two concepts that often appear the same on the surface. A person may seem loyal, always calling when needed, always available. But that loyalty is built on a foundation of convenience. It's not about mutual care. It's about fulfilling a need.
This is not true loyalty. This is convenience in disguise. Now, the Stoics didn't ask us to judge others, but they asked us to see. To observe without judgment, but to see clearly. What we learned from their teachings is not to cast others aside, but to understand that what they say matters less than how they act. The Stoic lens invites us to look deeper, to discern their actions and understand their motives, which are often hidden beneath layers of convenience. In seeing clearly, we gain the wisdom to make better decisions for ourselves. We begin to recognize patterns, not excuses. We stop waiting for people to change because we understand the nature of their behavior. Their actions tell us everything we need to know. So, ask yourself, what does their behavior reveal? The Stoic lesson here is about observing without being swayed by illusions of loyalty or kindness. By observing the behavior that reveals the true character, we protect our own boundaries. This awareness shifts the responsibility from others to ourselves, allowing us to act from a place of insight and discernment. The Stoics did not ask you to judge, they asked you to see. When you can see clearly, you can make choices that align with your own values, not with the needs of others. This clarity is the true power of the Stoic perspective, the power to act with intention, not react out of obligation. Have you ever caught yourself justifying someone's actions, even when they've repeatedly let you down? You know the pattern. They show up when they need something, and you make excuses for them. They're going through a tough time, you think. That's just who they are, you tell yourself. But deep down, you know the truth. Your rationalizations are simply a mask for what's really going on. Seneca once said, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." This quote cuts to the heart of the issue. We are so quick to rationalize the behavior of others, we don't stop to examine the true impact it has on us. Instead of confronting the pattern for what it is, we choose to accept it, often without even realizing we are doing so. It's easier to think, maybe I'm being too sensitive, or I don't want to seem difficult. We want to believe in the best of people. We want to be understanding, patient, kind. But at what point does understanding become permission?
When does our tolerance for repeated disappointment start to undermine our own peace? We all do it. Rationalization is a form of self-deception, and in the case of people who only remember you when they need something, it becomes a form of self-betrayal. You tell yourself that maybe this time will be different, or that they're struggling, or that it's not their fault. But you must ask yourself, at what point do you stop making excuses for their behavior and start acknowledging the truth? This is where the Stoics would intervene. They wouldn't say, "Stop caring," or "Cut them off." What they would ask is this: what is your responsibility here? You are not responsible for someone else's actions, but you are responsible for how you respond. And the Stoics taught us that the first step in freeing yourself from unnecessary pain is seeing things as they truly are. You see, we are all prone to rationalizing because it makes us feel better in the moment. It softens the blow. It gives us the illusion of control. But as Seneca reminds us, we suffer more in imagination than in reality. The true suffering comes not from the actions of others, but from the way we allow ourselves to be blinded by excuses. The moment we stop excusing the behavior and begin seeing the pattern clearly is the moment we take back control. But before we continue, there is a question the Stoics would insist you face first.
And it is about you. You arrived here identifying as the person who is used. You may have told yourself that it's always you, always bending over backward for others, always the one they turn to when they need something. And perhaps that's true. You've been there, dependable, unwavering, answering every call, every message, every request, every time they needed you. But before you continue down that road, the Stoics would ask you to pause for a moment longer and face a harder question. Is there anyone in your life who only remembers you when they need something? Take a moment to think. Someone who pops into your life only when it's convenient for them. Someone whose presence is fleeting, except when they want something. Have you ever considered that maybe, just maybe, you're playing that role for someone else too? It's easy to see the pattern when you're on the receiving end. But what if you're the one creating the pattern? This isn't a question meant to accuse you or make you feel guilty. It's simply a mirror, an opportunity for self-reflection. The Stoics didn't preach judgment. They preached seeing clearly. This isn't about shaming you for being generous or available, but about realizing that generosity, when given without discernment, can quickly slip into self-erasure. Are you, perhaps, giving more of yourself than what's healthy? Not because of genuine connection, but because of fear of being left behind or forgotten. The discomfort you feel right now is not guilt. It is the beginning of discernment. The Stoics didn't condemn people for their flaws, but rather, they emphasized the importance of recognizing them so that you could free yourself from unhealthy patterns. The mirror isn't for condemnation, it's for liberation. By seeing yourself clearly, you can break free from the illusion that you must always be available, always on standby, waiting to fulfill someone else's needs. And as you stand before this mirror, think about it. When you look into it, do you see someone who is living according to their own values? Or do you see someone who is, perhaps unconsciously, perpetuating patterns of convenience for others? This realization is not a punishment. It is your power. The Stoic rule is clear. You cannot control others. You can only control how you engage with them. Your value isn't determined by how often or how readily you answer their calls. It's determined by how well you respect yourself and your boundaries. And that begins with facing the truth of your patterns, even if it's uncomfortable. Have you ever wondered why you keep answering the same call, even after recognizing the pattern? It's as if something inside compels you to respond, despite knowing they only reach out when they need something. It's easy to chalk it up to weakness. After all, why would you keep engaging in a relationship that doesn't feel balanced?
But it's not weakness that keeps you answering. It's something deeper, more complex. Fear. The fear of being labeled difficult is a powerful force in many of our lives. In American culture, where politeness and being a team player are highly valued, the idea of being labeled as difficult or high maintenance can feel unbearable. You've been taught that it's better to be accommodating, to be the one who shows up and says yes, than to risk being seen as the person who says no. But in constantly making yourself available, are you actually being true to your own values? Or are you simply conforming to cultural programming? There's also the fear of the empty space. Saying no means creating a void. And that void isn't just an absence of availability. It's a confrontation with discomfort, silence, and the possibility that you'll have to face something you've been avoiding. What happens when you stop filling every space with your responses, your presence?
Will it feel like you're losing a connection, or will you realize that you're gaining something far more valuable? Your own peace. And then, there's the deep-seated fear that availability equals being valued. If you're not always there for them, do you become invisible? In a culture that places a high value on service and always showing up, there's an underlying assumption that the more available you are, the more you matter. But when your worth is tied solely to your usefulness, you lose sight of what truly makes you valuable. Your autonomy, your integrity, your ability to live by your own standards, not someone else's needs. These fears are powerful, and they're not something to be ashamed of. But understanding them, naming them, is the first step toward freeing yourself. Epictetus taught that we must focus on what we can control, and the fear that drives our actions is one of those things we must examine. When we are governed by fear, we lose our agency. And while fear may drive us to keep answering, the Stoic approach would ask us to question whether we're answering out of genuine care or out of a subconscious need to avoid discomfort. Availability without discernment is not generosity. It is the quiet erosion of self. When you answer because of fear, not values, you are not being generous to yourself. Instead, you are depleting your emotional reserves, reinforcing patterns that leave you drained. The choice is yours. Continue down the path of pleasing others at the expense of your well-being, or reclaim your power by discerning where your attention and energy are truly needed. It's easy to think that being always available is a virtue. You show up for people, no matter the cost, because you believe that's what good friends, partners, and colleagues do. But what if you're paying a hidden price for this availability?
What if every time you answer the call, even when you don't want to, you're giving away something of yourself? Something you can never get back. This is the hidden cost of always being there. It's not about dramatic events or sudden crises. It's about the slow, unnoticed erosion that happens over time. You might not see it happening in the moment, but the more you sacrifice your time, energy, and emotional bandwidth for others, the more you deplete yourself. The Stoics would say, the impediment to action advances action. What seems like a selfless act in the moment, a simple response to someone's need, might actually be preventing you from taking action in your own life. The first cost is emotional depletion. It doesn't come from one big event. Rather, it builds up incrementally, from all the small moments when you put others' needs before your own. Over time, this constant giving drains your emotional reserves. You're not left empty all at once, but piece by piece, you give more of yourself away until you realize you're too tired to care anymore, at least not in the ways that matter to you. Next is the normalization of self-erasure. Every time you make yourself available when you don't want to, you're teaching yourself that your own needs are secondary. You begin to accept the belief that you should always be available, that your time and energy are infinite resources to be poured into others. This gradual erasure of your own boundaries isn't something that happens overnight. It becomes a habit, a pattern so ingrained that you stop questioning it. Then, there's resentment accumulation. It starts small. A twinge of frustration here, a bit of fatigue there. But when you continually put others before yourself, those small frustrations begin to accumulate. They pile up until you reach a point where you can no longer ignore them. What once felt like generosity starts to feel like a burden. The exhaustion of constantly being available gives way to resentment.
At first, it's subtle, but over time it becomes louder, and you find yourself resenting those who never seem to reciprocate. It begins as fatigue. It ends as quiet contempt. And finally, you are teaching people how to treat you. Every time you answer a call you didn't want to take, you are confirming to someone that you are available for exactly that. You are reinforcing the belief that you will always be there, no matter the cost. This isn't just about being taken advantage of. It's about the message you send. You are modeling behavior, teaching others what they can expect from you. And as long as you continue to show up on demand, that's what you'll continue to get. We've all been taught that being available to others, always present and willing, is a form of virtue. It's seen as a good thing, a measure of our character. But let's pause for a moment. What if being constantly available to everyone isn't virtuous at all? What if it's a trap? The Stoics didn't teach us to celebrate endless giving. They celebrated purposeful engagement. Being available for every request, every moment, without discernment, isn't virtuous. It's a pattern of self-erasure. It doesn't align with Stoic principles, which call us to act in accordance with our values, not in response to every need that comes our way. Virtue is not measured by how many people can reach you. It's measured by whether your actions align with your values. Stoicism calls us to ask, does my availability serve my higher purpose, or am I simply responding to external demands? The Stoic wisdom here is clear. When you allow yourself to be available indiscriminately, you are not honoring yourself. You are simply being reactive. To be discriminating about your attention is not selfishness. It is the beginning of self-governance. This is the core of Stoic practice. We must prioritize what aligns with our values and act deliberately. The choice of where to place our attention is not just a luxury. It's an act of wisdom, a commitment to living according to our principles, not to others' whims. You are not required to be accessible to everyone who finds you useful. You are required only to act in accordance with your values. And among those values is the recognition that your attention, your time, and your presence are not infinite resources to be distributed without discernment. At first, this might feel like a weighty statement. It might even seem counterintuitive. Isn't being available a sign of kindness? Isn't saying yes to every request a form of virtue? The culture teaches us that to be present for others is the mark of a good person. But the Stoic view shifts this perspective. It doesn't question your desire to help or care. It simply asks you to recognize the true cost of being endlessly available, without considering whether those actions align with your higher values. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "We are more often frightened than hurt, and we suffer more from imagination than from reality." The pain you feel when you are stretched thin by endless demands isn't always from what you are giving, but from what you are not receiving in return. From the erosion of your own self-respect
the quiet sacrifice of your time, your energy, and your peace. This rule, at its core, is not about telling you to be cold, to shut yourself off, or to push people away. It is about understanding that your attention is a finite resource. Your time, your presence, these are precious. They belong to you, not to anyone who happens to need them in the moment. The Stoic framework teaches us that we must govern our engagement with the world not out of scarcity or selfishness, but out of a clear, principled decision to honor ourselves and our values. What does this mean in practice? It means that when you say no, it is not an act of rejection.
It is an act of honoring your own space, your own boundaries, your own inner life. Epictetus taught that what we control is not the actions of others, but how we choose to respond to them. You are not required to be at the beck and call of anyone who reaches out, seeking your time or your presence, especially when their needs do not align with your core values. This isn't just about them. This rule is ultimately about your relationship with yourself. It's about ensuring that you are not sacrificing your inner equilibrium to meet the external demands of others. The question isn't whether others will be upset by your absence. The question is whether your choices reflect your values, or if they reflect someone else's needs. This is not bitterness. This is not coldness. This is discernment. And discernment is the quietest form of self-respect. Recognizing when you are being used and when you are being present out of genuine desire is not a flaw. It is wisdom in practice. You are allowed to be unavailable. You are allowed to say no when it doesn't align with your values. And when you do, you honor yourself. In navigating relationships and interactions, it's not enough to act on instinct or default to what feels right in the moment. Stoicism asks us to pause, to examine the situation without judgment, and to act with intentionality rather than reaction. It's easy to become reactive, to give without thinking, or to assume that every demand is urgent. But true discernment lies in our ability to notice the patterns of behavior without jumping to conclusions. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The things you think about determine the quality of your mind." It's not about what others ask of you, but about how you respond to those requests. Observe the pattern before reacting. Notice how often someone only reaches out when they need something, and ask yourself, am I giving from a place of choice, or am I responding out of habit, out of fear of rejection, or because I've trained myself to be available only when called upon? The first principle of discernment is to see things as they are, not as you wish them to be. It's easy to paint others in a light of generosity or kindness, to tell ourselves they're just going through a tough time. And while empathy is important, it's also critical to recognize when we are allowing our empathy to override our personal boundaries. You can care deeply for someone, but you must also ask, is this pattern of behavior one of genuine need, or has it become a habitual expectation? Seneca cautioned, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." This insight rings true in our interactions. Often, our fear of being seen as difficult or unkind pushes us to answer every call, to be the one who always shows up, even when it's not in our best interest. Distinguishing between an emergency and a habit is vital to understanding where you can draw the line. One person may genuinely need help in a crisis, while another has simply conditioned you to be available whenever they need assistance. The difference is subtle but crucial. Recognizing the difference requires emotional clarity,
something that only comes through intentional self-awareness. Now, ask yourself, when was the last time this person reached out without needing something? Epictetus reminded us that it's not about the actions of others, but our responses to them. It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. Are you responding out of fear? Fear of being judged as unhelpful? Fear of not being seen as caring? Fear of what will happen if you don't respond quickly enough?
Or are you responding from your values, understanding that your time, your energy, and your attention are limited resources, and should therefore be governed by your own principles, not by the whims of others? The third principle of discernment is to respond from values, not from fear. When you say yes to every request, are you doing so because you believe it aligns with your values of kindness and generosity? Or are you acting out of fear that others will judge you, leave you behind, or perceive you as unkind? Reflect on this question. What does my response say about how I govern myself? Your ability to say no without guilt is a powerful tool of self-governance. Stoicism teaches us that we must not live in response to others' needs, but live according to our own understanding of virtue and justice. Finally, let the relationship find its true level. There is no need for dramatic exits or confrontations. Simply stop inflating the relationship by making yourself overly available when it is not necessary. As Marcus Aurelius advised, it is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste much of it. You don't have to end relationships, but you should stop pretending they are more than they are. When you cease to inflate your availability, the true nature of the relationship will be revealed. If the relationship can stand on its own without the artificial support of your constant presence, it will. If it cannot, that too is valuable information. Before we conclude, reflect on this diagnostic question. If you were no longer useful to them, would they still know your name? This question does not invite judgment. It invites awareness. It is a chance for you to step back, see the pattern clearly, and ask yourself, am I responding out of genuine care, or because I fear being left behind, ignored, or undervalued? In every relationship, remember, discernment is not about denying others. It is about protecting the energy and resources you have for the right causes. True generosity, as the Stoics would remind us, is not the act of offering ourselves to everyone indiscriminately, but the ability to recognize when our resources, time, attention, energy, are best served and when they are being drained without meaningful reciprocation. You are not here to fulfill every need. You are here to act from the place of your own sovereignty, your own values. And in that lies your true power. Letting go is not about severing ties, nor is it about bitterness or revenge. It is not about the dramatic exit we often think it should be. Letting go is about releasing the need to shape your emotional life around someone else's needs. It's the quiet act of no longer organizing yourself to fulfill others' expectations at the cost of your own peace. Marcus Aurelius once said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." What this teaches us is that what we choose to engage with, how we spend our time, and the attention we offer, those are within our control. The act of letting go, then, is a return to personal agency, not an act of resentment. The person who only calls when they need something did not fail you. They showed you where you had not yet learned to protect yourself. That is not their gift to you intentionally, but it is yours to take if you choose. The lesson here is not about condemnation. It's about realization. You are not at the mercy of others' needs. You are learning where your boundaries need to be drawn
and how to honor them. You are not a service. You are not a resource. You are a person with a sovereign inner life. And that life deserves to be governed by your principles, not by whoever happens to need you today. The power of discernment is recognizing that your time, energy, and presence are finite resources, and not everyone should have access to them on demand. Letting go does not always look like a conversation. Sometimes it looks like simply becoming less available and discovering in that stillness what remains. You don't owe anyone a dramatic confrontation or a bold declaration. The Stoic response often requires no words at all. It requires only that you become less available for everyone except for yourself. In that space, you will find what truly matters, and it will be yours to shape, free from the demands of others. The Stoic rule for people who only remember you when they need something is not, in the end, about them at all. It is about you, choosing each day to be worthy of your own attention first. It is about understanding that your time, your energy, your presence are not infinite resources to be given away without thought. True wisdom lies in recognizing this, in seeing the difference between what you can offer from a place of personal agency and what you are giving away out of obligation or fear. This journey, this practice, is not about removing people or cutting ties. It is about cultivating a sense of sovereignty over your own life. It is about discerning where you place your attention and ensuring it aligns with your principles. The Stoics didn't teach us to reject others, but to build a life rooted in clarity and self-respect. So, ask yourself, are you living a life governed by your own values or by the needs of others? When you start answering this question honestly, you reclaim your power. You begin to understand that true generosity comes not from endless availability, but from conscious engagement. The Stoic way is not a rejection of others, but a deliberate choice of where to invest your energy. It is the quiet, steady work of mastering your own life, not the reactive exhaustion of pleasing everyone around you.
In practicing this, you will find that letting go is not a loss, but a profound act of self-respect. If this reflection has been useful, consider staying, not to be entertained, but to continue practicing the kind of clear-eyed attention that Stoicism has always demanded of us.